Since Satan is the since Satan is the origin of sin, or let me see if I wrote the question wrong here. It's asking about, since Satan was in heaven, how can Satan have originally sinned in heaven since there's no sin in heaven? Okay? So it's asking the question about Satan, and I might have misread that specifically, but it's asking how can Satan have originally sinned in heaven since there is no sin in heaven? Okay? All right, so we're going to look at a lot of things in the Old Testament. Okay? So get your Bibles out, and we'll look here specifically. So first of all, we want to look at Satan's fall from heaven is described by Jesus, who witnessed Satan's fall. Okay? So if you were to look in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, Luke writes this in reference to what Jesus said. So Luke chapter 10, verse 18, Luke says this: "And he said to them, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning." So there's a good question here, is how could Jesus have seen that? Where was Jesus at? Jesus was in heaven as well. Okay, and that goes back to the fact that Jesus has what? Always existed. So Jesus is there in the very beginning with God the Father, God the Spirit, and he sees the rebellion that occurs when Satan then is cast out of heaven, and he says here that he came down like a lightning down to earth. Okay. All right, so second thing we want to look at is we know that the angels were created before the earth. Okay, so look over at Job 38, verses 4 through 7. So again, we're looking at specific details as we look to answer this question about Satan sinning. So Job writes in Job 38, he says in verse 4, he says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" So this is a conversation that, remember, is God's having with Job. Okay, so he's asking Job, where were you at when I laid the foundation of the earth? So he says, "Where were you at when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you understand, who set its measurements, since you know, or who stretched the line on it, on what were its bases sunk, or who laid its foundation? When the morning stars sang together," okay, "and all the sons of God shouted with joy." So he's talking the morning star. That's always a reference to, that was what we would say is Lucifer there, or the Satan himself. Not Satan, but before he actually rebelled. Okay, so and he talks about the sons of God shouting for joy. So again, sons of God referred to as angels there. Okay. So we see here that this is going on with Satan created before, angels created before the earth. Now, when you're looking at a time frame, we know that sin entered when? In what chapter of which book? Genesis, okay? So it entered Genesis chapter 3. When you look in the Bible, really, there's only 4 chapters in the Bible where there's no sin. The first 2 in Genesis and the last 2 in Revelation. Everything else is sin throughout the rest. So when you look at the question here about when did this occur, what do we see at the very end of Genesis chapter 1? What did God say about his creation? He said it was what? It was very, very good. Very good. So we can look then and say that the fall of Satan happened sometime at the end of Genesis 1, which is probably the beginning of Genesis 2, before beginning of Genesis 3. Before Satan is revealed as what? As the serpent who deceives Eve. So before that, that's just when Satan falls. So Satan's fall, therefore, occurred sometime, somewhere, after the time the angels were created and before the temptation of Adam and Eve in the garden. So this is when this occurred. Okay. All right. So now we want to look here at a time frame. Let's go back and look at what the scriptures teach. So the Bible teaches that Satan was created in perfection and given a prominent position in heaven. Okay? So go to the book of Ezekiel. So he was Lucifer here, who was a high opponent cherubim, Some people said he was the choir master of heaven. So it says here in Ezekiel 28, beginning in verse 11. Okay? Ezekiel 28, beginning in verse 11, and we're going to read down through verse 18. Okay? All right, it says, again, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says Lord Yahweh, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Okay? Then he says, you were in Eden, the garden of Eden. Every precious stone was your covering. And then he begins to list these different stones, the ruby and the topaz and the diamond, the beryl and onyx and the jasper, and several other ones there they list, turquoise, emerald. Then he says, and gold, and he says the workmanship of your settings and your sockets was in you. And then he says, on the day that you were created, they were prepared. Now look what he says in verse 14. You were the anointed cherubim who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created. So God's given a description, or Ezekiel's given a description of the creation of Lucifer. That he was this anointed cherubim. But it says in verse 15 that something happened. Okay? It says that from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. Now, what was the unrighteousness that was found in him? Pride. Okay? And we're going to see here in just a minute what that pride was. So unrighteousness was found in him. And it says, by the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. Okay? So Satan here, who was created, he was the anointed cherubim. He was blameless in your ways from the day you created until pridefulness, unrighteousness entered him, and then he was then cast out of heaven. And that would be where Jesus then saw him being cast out of heaven like lightning. Then he continues on. He says, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherubim, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lofty because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they may see you. This is verse 18. By the abundance of your iniquities and the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore, I have brought out fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you, and I have turned you to ashes on the earth in the eyes of all who see you. So Ezekiel gives us a description of Satan's rebellion in heaven and the fact that he was blameless until unrighteousness entered in him, and then he was cast out of heaven. Now, also, Isaiah gives us a glimpse of this too, and he's going to give us some additional details about Satan's pridefulness. Okay? Satan's pride, his desire to be like God himself. That's what Satan wanted. He wanted to be like God, and he was very convincing, because what did he do? He was so convincing that he convinced a third of the holy angels to rebel against their Creator. Okay? Now look what Isaiah says. If you were look in Isaiah 14, beginning in verse 12. Looking at two questions. Satan's fall from heaven because of his own pride, because he desired to be like God. And then secondly, Isaiah says here, because of Satan's sin, God again cast him out of heaven. Okay, so he was cast out. God then desiring to give him what Satan wanted. For Satan wanted to be like God, so he says, fine, I'll cast you out and give you a dominion, a domain, which was heaven, which was earth, for a time frame. Again, but he still does not have reign, but he is again called what? The prince of this world. So listen to what Isaiah says, beginning in verse 12. He says here, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. So when you're seeing that star of the morning or the son of the dawn, that's a reference to Satan. Okay, and you'll see that also in the book of Revelation as well. This star of the morning, the son of the dawn. Then he says, you have been cut down, or you have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations, but you said in your heart. Now, this is Isaiah speaking in regards to what Satan is saying. So he says, but you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Now, when you're listening to that, what's one of the main two words that you hear there? I will. I will. I will. Very similar to when God said He's going to change us, because remember, when God says He's going to put a new heart, He says, I will do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to change you. In the same way here, Satan is saying, I will do this. I will do this, to the point where he says, I will make myself like the Most High. Okay? Like the Most High. And of course, because of his rebellion here, his own pridefulness, that got him cast out of heaven. Okay? So Satan rebelled, and again, he was so convincing that he convinced a third of the holy angels to rebel along with him. And you see that over in Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. It says here, and his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven. Okay? That's talking about the holy angels. And threw them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her. Okay? And then later on, if you wanted to get some reference points, if you were to look over in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, also in Job chapter 1, verse 6, and then also in Job chapter 2, verse 1, it's talking about the sons of God there. And of course, that's the fallen angels then that had rebelled after. They rebelled in heaven, and then they were cast down to the earth along with Satan himself. So going back to the original question, is the original question aspect of sin, Satan's rebellion, did happen in heaven. So he was there, he rebelled, and then as soon as he rebelled, God cast him out of heaven. He was cast out because of his prideful rebellion, wanting to be God himself. Okay? So again, if any